focusing on the importance of business continuity. Over the past few months, almost all businesses have seen their world of work turned upside down. We're going to talk about how to prepare and educate both your leadership and organization to always be ready for the unpredictable, how to limit disruption, and continuing workforce productivity. My name is Safi Obadilla. I'm the Field CTO at Citrix. And today I'm joined by Dave, Shana, and Jerry. I'll get each one of you guys to introduce yourselves. Dave, let's start with you.
Okay, hi there. My name is Dave Milner. I'm a corporate banker turned HR practitioner turned consultant and occupational psychologist. So that probably means I'm not very good at any of those because I seem to have had multiple careers. I'm probably better known as HR curator, which in social media channels is quite well known in the HR field. I'm really looking forward to today and obviously trying to look at the balance between business and people, which has been my continuous thrust over the last 10 years or so.
Thanks, Dave. Shana?
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Shana Wiblin. So much like Dave, I come to our conversation today wearing very many hats. I'm a management consultant turned academic and currently primarily involved in being an executive educator. So looking at MBAs and executive MBA subjects around talent management and how we mobilize and organize our workforces to execute strategy. I also am a researcher, so I'm interested in the intersection between talent management, workforce strategies, and technology, which of course is becoming a huge actor in our conversations about the world of work and workplaces currently.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shana. And last but not least, Jerry.
Jerry Lavin. I'm a product strategist with our product management and marketing group within Citrix. Formerly a customer as well, so I imagine poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher. I'm never quite sure which way around that works. So interested in working with our customers, hearing what their challenges are, how they're working on their digital transformations, and then feeding that back to our product team to help evolve our product strategy.
No worries. Thanks, Jerry. So let's get started. The focus, I guess, I wanted to kick things off by sort of trying to define what business continuity is. And Jerry, I think I'll come to you for this one, but we hear often organizations planning for the unpredictable, that they work on disaster recovery plans, making sure their data centers are available and networks are available. But, as this COVID-19 situation showed us, it's not always about the technology and being locked down in your house. People aren't actually able to get to their work. And so there's no point having all the IT systems available. So what's business continuity, Jerry?
Safi, good question. I think as a customer of Citrix, I worked on a number of DR plans. And I think that's essentially what a lot of BCP was. It was, how do we respond to an event from a technology perspective? And I think the way a lot of organizations planned for that, it was backwards looking. And in all honesty, a lot of that was informed by the previous big events like 9/11. So they looked at something that, I guess to put a crude term on it, left you in a smoking hole scenario pretty much that you had to recover from. And the idea was it was a limited event. It was a huge event, but it was limited. And you had to have a way to get your staff up and working again afterwards. And that might be using something like a SunGuard office. You get everyone into a new office location. You've got some standby IT kit. But the current pandemic has been unprecedented. And really to respond to that, you need a solution that looked at your workforce first, rather than looking at buildings or looking at IT kit. And we had customers who were prepped for that. But I think they were prepped for that because that's the way that people worked anyway. They sort of disassociated how people worked and where they worked. So it was easy for them to respond to that. And I think there were other organizations who had this specific kind of DR approach, which was, move people to another location or bring on standby data centers or whatever. And that just wasn't fit for purpose in this case. So they had to, react really, really quickly. We had to work with them. Other vendors had to work with them to help them react really, really quickly to that. And I think that was it. We had a situation that was global. It wasn't limited to, to one geo or one specific set of IT infrastructure. And the reaction to that had to be really, really different as well. I think the other thing is it's helped people take a step back and look at overall about BCP as being an ongoing process. So business continuity isn't something that you kind of create a plan, put it in a box. It's something that you can interweave into actually your working practices. And I think those organizations which were able to react the best and respond, it was because business continuity was the way that they did business normally.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, where we're not just focused on the technology. We understand there's people that ultimately drive the productivity. It's not just the tools that they use. So,
yep.
You know, given this experience and the conversations you're having with different organizations, are you seeing them starting to shift the way they think about business continuity?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I'm thinking of two customers that I've dealt with in the financial space. One had their working practices, they had kind of a high trust approach with their employees. They could work from anywhere. The other one had a more traditional office-based approach. For the organization that had that sort of more evolved working practices, I mean, it was more than a blip. Let's put it that way. There's no way we can describe the pandemic as a blip, but they were able to respond to it really quickly. And for their end users, they'd been used to working this way. I mean, nobody was used to having the kids at home the whole time or being confined to one space or the extended nature of this. But from an IT practices perspective, a collaboration, how you work with their colleagues, it was fairly normal. They could react to it. In the context of everything else that was happening, they could react really well. For the other organization, it was a complete change. They had to, how do we get people working remotely? How do we trust them to work remotely? What kit do they need? What IT processes do they need? So a lot of digital transformation plans that have been on the back burner for years and been held up by security or regulation or budget or whatever, or headcount, suddenly were accelerated out the door, and we've people rolling out Zoom, Teams, Citrix VDI solutions really, really quickly to address these requirements. But then the catch-up part is how do people work in this scenario? If your processes were still paper-based, you suddenly had to change that. So again, we saw different people react in very different ways.
No, that's interesting. And so, David, I mean, just from your experience in working with different organizations around the world, I mean, why do you think business continuity hasn't been given the importance it deserves?
I think the issue that we've got here is that this pandemic has gone way beyond any disaster recovery schemes that organizations have got, which always tend to be very process and product / customer orientated, quite rightly. I think the challenge that we've had here is that the pandemic has undoubtedly affected people, not just individually in terms of their well-being, but also about where are they going to work, where are they going to operate. There was a great magazine I saw, came in a couple of days ago, and it said, "It's the end of work as we know it." And I thought that was quite an interesting way of thinking, that actually things may not necessarily be the same again, because Jerry was talking about organizations and the digital transformation. Well, why has it taken them years to implement it when it seemed to get done within 2 weeks? So suddenly we seem to have broken down a lot of barriers. Now, maybe that's just crisis and it's survival mode. Maybe that's the frame that we're in this survival mode. But I think the one thing that I've seen talking to quite a lot of different execs in organizations is that the impact and the way they've dealt with it is undoubtedly aligned to their organization's resilience. And I think organizational resilience will probably be one of the critical things that all organizations will probably reflect on and start to think about. How can we prepare for this better? Because resilience for me is the ability of an organization to deal with disruptions, adapt to change, and just get stuff done whilst things are all going on around us. So I think the enormity of this particular challenge has embraced people, leadership, process, and customers. And I think that's why it's been so huge. And I think it's going to undoubtedly, if you like, bring the future of work, as I've been talking about and Shana's been talking about. The future of work is now, and we seem to have, brought it together very quickly.
No, I agree. I mean, I think there's the old saying about necessity being the mother of invention, right? And I think, this extreme circumstance we're in has got, those organizations that are more resilient and more forward-thinking to some degree to take this opportunity to really redefine what their business model looks like. I think there's a lot of organizations out there that continue to do things as they've always done it, because that's the way it's always been done, right? And now, we can't do it like that anymore. How can we do it differently?
And I think if you look back, if you look at any organization and look at the strategy they had in place in January 2020, it's probably not obsolete, but it's got to be significantly changed moving forward. And so for something like that to have suddenly occurred, to have made that sort of radical change in terms of process, workforce delivery, different customer buying patterns, which we don't know about. There's a whole host of things which has brought transformation into days, not months or years. And I think, whatever the new normal is, that's the phrase people keep talking about, it's going to be an interesting place, because, underneath it all is going to be the global, probably recessionary trends, which, people are talking about. No,
that's right. That's right. And so this, and Shana, this question, I think I'm going to direct to you, because, we spoke about the change in businesses' mindset around how they're thinking, and we spoke about historically organizations focusing on technology, but a big element, and Jerry touched on this, was people, and how do we build people into these plans? And so it's not so much a business continuity plan, it's almost like an employee continuity plan. And now we're in this extreme mode of operation where we're locked in our houses with the cats, the dogs, the kids doing homeschooling, can't go out, there's no toilet paper. How do you help an employee be successful?
Oh, look, Safi, I think it's a fascinating time to be a social scientist at the moment. So whenever we see a challenge, for me as a researcher, I see an opportunity. And I think the question and the way in which you posed it about, we were doing these business continuity plans and we forgot about the people, kind of always leaves me a bit perplexed as an executive educator and a researcher, because it's like, how do you leave out the person or the peoples or your workforces that need to execute your operational needs, your strategy, as well as your business continuity plan? So when I'm thinking about or teaching on the idea of strategy and operations, and building on your point, Dave, is that at the heart of strategy execution is still our people. So the heart of business continuity is still our workforce. So as somebody that studies workforce management, I'm always perplexed about how did you, even the people in the room didn't go, how about the people that are going to do our job? And the other thing I would say in terms of that is, when we're talking about strategy and business continuity, I like to frame it in two particular ways. So one is scenario planning. So most of us are quite familiar with the idea of scenario planning, what is possible, then what is probable, and what's going to disrupt or decenter our organization plan and our strategy, and how many options do we have to pursue that. But operationally, we also should be asking questions about how do we keep the lights on. So Jerry, you were talking about the tech, and if we think about the technology, just how do we keep the business running? And I think the fascinating thing about COVID-19, which is also the scary thing, is that the whole world had to keep running at the same time. So we were all trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, how to remain commercially viable, when a lot of the factors or the variables that we have in those scenario plannings about our strategy execution didn't assume we all went through this together. Like we're all in this together is not an assumption that most of us, or even the most sophisticated organizations that I've had the privilege of working with or talking to, there's kind of no idea that the whole world would be doing business continuity at the same time, in real time, and very reactionary. So we're talking about the tech and it was always possible all along. There's a lovely meme that's going around about who was your biggest agency for digital transformation. and business continuity? Was it the CFO? Was it the CTO? Or was it COVID-19? And it's kind of like, as Dave said, we've been campaigning a bit against questioning what work is and how we value work and how we value outputs of our workforce for a long time. And it's just mean that we've got these external shocks that has gone, oh, maybe we need to rethink how we do things, and how we keep the lights on. How do we remain commercially viable? And then, of course, for me, I'm like, how do you skip people in your business continuity plans?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think that's the thing. I think that's the biggest opportunity that we have out of this, is that we have an opportunity to make it better, and really take the learnings of what worked and what didn't work, and try and build out a plan that's going to, be better for employees, for organisations, and I guess put us in a position where we're better prepared when something like this, God forbid, happens again. Dave, what's your thoughts? I mean, you talk to a lot of organisations, as I said before, and have you seen people sort of build a focus on employees as part of their business continuity planning?
I'm not sure it's been part of their plans, but I have seen a great upsurge in the interest in employee engagement, continuous listening, because suddenly, the thing that used to be the annual survey and we fill it in and we sort of have a plan and we talk to the employees and see how they feel and all that sort of stuff. I think has now suddenly reached a level where it's now very important, because suddenly you can't touch all the people who, you used to be able to connect with on a regular basis without making, a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever. Yeah. So I think engagement has definitely been leveraged upwards as being an important process. But, engagement historically has always been quite a reactive process. You get data, you get insight, and then you do something, hopefully. But I think, the continuous listening and asking the employees, how's it feeling? How's it doing? All that sort of thing. I think that is something that I think will become quite an important theme as we move forward into what I think is the reset. That how do we reset our organization and our workforce so that we're actually fit to do whatever we need to do as we deal with the challenges that 2021 is going to bring us, without a doubt. So I think that's a critical thing. And I think it's also a point I think Jerry and Shana have just touched on, which is the trust issue. And I think I've always found that the remote working challenge has always been underpinned by this word of trust, and maybe a lack of it from managers. I can't see what you're doing and all this sort of thing. And that seems to have suddenly disappeared, and that those concerns have disappeared. And I think the inherent lack of trust that managers may have had historically, I'd like to think, is going to change over this period of time. Because if there's one thing I hope that will come out of this whole terrible scenario, is that organizations remember that it's people, as Shana said, that run your strategy. It's people that deliver your strategy. The people are the critical part. You can have some great ideas, great products, great technology, but it's nothing unless you've got people. So I'm hoping that this will raise the game again of us looking at organizations in a more human or people-centric way.
And Safi, if I can add and extend and pick up on a point that I think is really important for us to have at the forefront of our conversations, is that this is a reset. It's not an upgrade. It's not a downgrade.
Right.
It's not a iterating of your business continuity plans or your strategy. Like, this is a reset. And I feel concerned for those organizations or leaders within organizations, recognizing that it is people, again, that are doing this on behalf of their organizations, if they don't think of it and frame it that way. It is a reset. The whole world is resetting simultaneously. Our notions of travel, time with family, time away from family, all that sort of stuff, where work happens, outcomes and outputs, but it is a reset. We have a new lens to be able to do some scenario planning about what is possible and what is probable. And now we have the opportunity, when we are devising those business continuity plans, to go, what if the world stops again at the same time? What else might that look like? And I think it's really important for those people that are engaging in this conversation to just go, don't tweak. Team, please don't tweak. It's not about tweaking. It's about reiterating and installing a new version. So whether that's not just the tech and the people way, but how do we actually reset and start again and take away a lot of the past assumptions that we have? Because as we've already looked at here with to do with your episode 2, working remotely and working from home was possible nearly all along.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It was possible. Was it probable? Maybe not. But now that possible has become probable, if not part of how we are going to do work moving forward. So again, just picking up on Dave's point of like, this is a reset, team. It's not a it's not an iteration.
No, that's right. And I think your point is spot on. I don't think it was ever the technology that was holding people back. It was people and policies. You know, whether it's trust or HR policies or what is a workplace and all those elements. And I absolutely agree, Sean. I think it's a unique opportunity we have, given that the whole world is in the same boat, for us to really do a reset on what the historical routine of work has been. You know, in your conversations with different organizations, Shana, are you seeing that organizations are thinking that way? Are they actually thinking that, you know, do I just need to try and get through this period and everything's going to go back to normal? Or, you know what, maybe I can redefine how we work and maybe that's going to be better for me and my employees.
Oh, look, it's a great question, Safi, and one I don't think we have the answers to yet. I think the jury's out. I think in terms of the jury being out is that there are so many unknown variables at the moment for us to try and calculate and do scenario planning around. We also need to realize that this was first and foremost a health crisis for the world. So the economic crisis, the workforce crisis, the schooling at home schooling crisis, it is about first and foremost saving lives and surviving as humanity and society. So I think that is one of the interesting things, again, which is quite different from our traditional way in which we would past ways of thinking about it, is that if I don't come into work, it's not just being productive. I could actually save your life. Like, again, that's a different set of questions that it's about. It's like, this is not about productivity, maintaining those sort of things. First and foremost, I want to be a respectful citizen and human being and know that by staying home and staying away, I can save your life. So I think that even as we're transitioning out, and as an Aussie, we are in the process of transitioning out, probably more than our UK colleagues, that organizations and even global ones will have to do this differently, because as countries, they are still dealing with health crises, while some of us have the opportunity to now rethink about how our workforce is structured. But at the end of the day, I think Dave raises a really important point, and one that I've been waxing lyrical on for a couple of decades as both a consultant and an executive educator, is that if you treat people badly and don't think about how work gets done in terms of outcomes before COVID-19, then I think this current situation is just illuminating really bad workplace practices or bad leadership and an absence of trust. And that is, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves at that sort of individual micro level of how individual leaders and managers react to that as leaders and team leaders, knowing that they are probably themselves encountering quite similar situations to their team, which again is quite different to what we've seen in previous scenario plannings, that like, actually my life looks the same as yours now, we're all in this together. Which That's makes it fascinating. So ask me again in 6 months' time, Safi, and I might have more answers for you, or I might just have more questions.
But just to build on what you just said, there's one thing I'm sure of, is that employees will remember how they've been treated during this period. And I know there'll be recruiting freezes and all this sort of stuff, but people will remember. And I think, you know, organizations, if you don't have a really clear people plan moving forward to reconnect with your employees, then whatever perception they may have about how they've been dealt with, how they've been treated, may well come back and bite you. So I think that's going to be critical.
And the other risk here is that people apply technology band-aids to address this. So, I've seen, let's all be more engaged by having our videos on in every call without respecting cultural differences, individual differences. And it comes back, I think, to that currency of trust that's going to be really important. That if you respect those employees and trust those employees, whether they do or don't have a camera on a particular call isn't indicative of whether they're working hard or productive for you. It's just that situation for them. And I think that trust currency is going to be really important. Again, talking to a colleague of mine in the professional services business, he was comparing his organization to a competitor. And I think the big difference that they had is they had the trust in people to get on and get work done. And they were seeing productivity advantages, even in the sort of depths of the, the worst stages of this. While the other organization really had to make huge cultural shifts, and was maybe, and there's a temptation there to go the other extreme, to become more prescriptive about how people work remotely, to have less trust. And I think that's a danger we need to avoid.
Yeah.
And the way to pick up on the trust thing too is that, so words are expensive. We say actions are worth more than words, but I think in times of crisis, even before times of crises, but words are really expensive. They are your asset or they are your liability. And we can see that, I think, in comparing leadership, even at country levels as well as organizational levels. There is a big difference, not just in trust, but your perception of your workforce in terms of it's keeping the lights on, in terms of we're all in this together or we're going to do what we have to do. So they're very different sentiments and narratives as part of organizational dialogues. As we're talking about the continuity, the last thing that you really want if you're doing a good job is to go, well, in the process of doing this, actually, I'm going to go at home and this is my time to learn that new skill you keep telling me I can do or knit, versus actually my day-to-day job of what I do and what I deliver isn't fundamentally going to change. The how might, but the what won't.
No, that's right. Well, and you touched on leadership, Shana. I mean, how do you think different sectors, I guess the leadership in different sectors have handled this crisis? Have they done a good job, okay job? Did they have the right policies in place to try and deal with this type of scenario?
Oh, look, again, another fascinating question. So for me, I love watching the different leaders of countries respond first and foremost, because this is a health crisis and we are citizens. So it's interesting to see the different approaches, because organizations and leaders are having to make decisions, and they're having to make decisions based on those unknowns at the moment, which when we're teaching strategy, it's like, how do you figure out how to make decisions in regards of unknown unknowns? And I think from the organizational point of view is that two things I could really say. One is that, you can kind of gauge when an organization is in danger because the leaders go MIA. So now is the time in organizations, if you want to do business continuity, you've got to be front and center, you've got to be visible, your staff need to be able to see you. And the other thing is we have to make decisions. So in terms of business continuity and how leaders are doing it and organizations are doing it well, it's really important that we separate the decisions from the results. So making a decision at a particular point in time was contextual, which was the right thing to do. How those results play out and how we do that and evaluate the quality of the leadership. So many factors and variables are changing for all of us worldwide that we need to look at the decisions. And so I think from a leadership point of view, it's about one, being visible. Please don't go MIA. And two, making decisions and owning those decisions and having the reasons of why you've made those decisions and communicating them to your staff first before external stakeholders. So there's, we were talking off camera about TikTok, but TikTok's awash with organizational stories or people's stories about, oh, I just found out I lost my job through the media, or I just found out that we were going to do this through the media or through a press release. And as the strategy person, I'm like, please don't do that again. Like, at least communicate the change, let your staff remunerate on that, sleep on that, and then maybe go public with the news. So again, if this is the way in which your workforce was operating or your leadership was operating pre-COVID-19, all it's doing is making it very bright and shiny, I think, for more people to be able to see as we're at home consuming content a lot more on the digital form.
No, that's right. Dave, your thoughts?
I think I saw a survey, I think yesterday, and the figures may be not quite right, but in my head, I remember vaguely seeing the headline. It was done by Hayes Recruitment, and it was thousands and thousands of employees. And I think 51% said they thought leadership had done an okay job. And I was sort of like, that's really not good enough.
No.
That's really not good enough. I mean, it's encouraging, but it isn't good enough. And you know, I've seen a lot of a big clamor for all this training of how to train managers and leaders how to manage remotely. And I'm like, if you're a good or a great leader, you should be able to manage people wherever they are, whether they're next to you, in the next floor, in another building, in another country. It doesn't really matter. So I think, you know, all this new training for remote management, I think is rubbish. And I really think that we need to understand that leaders really need to be focused on how do you deal with a transformational agenda? And you probably need 4 things. You need clarity in terms of how you communicate stuff to your employees. You need to be an energizer to keep people enthused. You need to be what I call an experience builder, somebody who builds an experience where people say, God, I want to work for that guy or lady, or I want to be in that organization. And obviously, finally, you've got to be, you know, a deliverer, somebody who still keeps delivering through others. And I think we just got to get back to basics, guys, because great managers and leaders know what to do, but through their behaviors. It doesn't matter what the context is. And so, you know, I think we need to sometimes, yeah, this is a crisis, it is a challenge, but we shouldn't use it as an excuse for things, because I believe that if leaders and managers knew what they were doing beforehand, they would rise to the challenge and deal with it. And I think I've heard quite a lot of rumors and stuff where HR have done a great job, you know, that, and I think HR have done a great job in a lot of organizations, but I sense that they've done a great job because they've had to fill a hole. And the hole is that managers have not been able to understand how to do stuff in this situation. And that could be because there's poor training, poor learning. I don't know, but it's something I think all organizations are going to have to address, because you just can't keep relying on some other, you know, force to try and make up for something that should already be in place.
No, I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think, you know, just knowing inherently how to deal with this situation is the sign of a strong leader, people manager, and that's something that's there. And I guess, you know, as you guys have both said, you know, I think this scenario will surface very quickly all of those bad habits that may exist within your organization, bad business models, business practices, all that stuff is all out there. So, you know, if that's the case, you know, we've talked about people, we've talked about the importance of focusing on people, strong leadership being important. You know, how do organizations succeed during times of unpredictable events? You know, whether it's this lockdown or, God forbid, something else happens, how do they set themselves up for success? And Jerry, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, look, I think in the current situation, and we're still kind of reeling, I guess we're moving just past the survival phase of it and trying to adapt to it. I think there's the opportunity for businesses to look at themselves, and there's an opportunity to try and reinvent and make the best of the scenario, and maybe look at what they've been doing. And I see that from small local businesses that I interact with. So people who ran restaurants and bars that have been shut down, who've now gone into other revenue streams, whether it's, you know, providing, you can do takeaway meals. You drive up and somebody puts the food into the boot of your car. So there's complete social distancing and no interaction. To hotel chains taking an opportunity to refurbish, to organizations just looking at the way they do revenue streams. So we see it a lot in education now, people looking more at online. But I mean, it's still early days, and I think people need to be very much on their toes and look about how they can react to this. We're almost certainly heading for some type of recession, whether it's, you know, a little V-shaped bounce or it's a longer L-shaped one. I think it's somewhere in between seems to be the consensus at the moment. So again, people are going to have to react to that in different ways. Different sectors and different geographies are going to be affected differently as well. I think one thing that I think a lot of businesses may take from this is just the whole planning for situations like this. I think maybe it was Paul Krugman, I can't remember now, had the concept of a pre-mortem, where you basically look at the very worst things that can happen and plan to those as well. And I think a lot of organizations had, you know, had little point plans, had, you know, ideas of how you recover from a very small bounce. I think a lot of people are going to, once we've reset from this, well, whatever that looks like, is taking the opportunity to have more in-depth planning, something that's, I think, more holistic and includes the whole organization.
How can organizations succeed during these type of unpredictable times?
So, as if I put my executive educator hat on, life every single day is unpredictable. So it's interesting, this idea of COVID-19 somehow being this massive, yes, the whole world has, and we are resetting. But in terms of business continuity and setting ourselves up for success, we have to have some slack in the system. We have to have some agility in terms of our mindset, our policies, and our practices. So that's the first point I would make in response to that question. The second one is that I literally study how people mobilize their workforces to execute strategy. And the amount of times I say to people, when will you know whether that execution of strategy was successful? Or when will you know that that resource allocation was successful? When will you know that that definition or that decision was successful? And I'm still like constantly seeing blank stares, like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if we do this, then that, right? So business continuity, scenario planning is about what is possible and probable. So you were saying setting yourself up for success, that's part of my everyday discourse as well. It's like, what is possible, what is probable? How will we know that we've done something has been successful? And so when we're talking about setting organizations up for success, I think one of the fascinating things that COVID-19 is illuminating is that people didn't know what the success parameters were to start with. And so this has been a great opportunity, if you want to look at it that as an opportunity. Some will consider it very an unwelcome challenge, but to reiterate and reset what is our success parameters. So for some of us, we are still setting ourselves up for success. We can't think about that or talk about that yet. We're still in survival mode. How do we survive? How do we remain commercially viable? How do we keep the lights on? But we do have organizations that are about how do we thrive? How do we set ourselves up for success? How do we do strategy as variety? So how do we pivot? How do we turn? And as Dave has said, and the conversation so far have done, is if you don't have those workplace practices and those strategies and ways of working pre-COVID-19, then you will find that incredibly challenging. And that's not a misnomer for any form of leadership, but that agility, that resilience, the creativity, the ability to adapt is absolutely everything that we should have in our scenario and strategy execution plans anyway. And again, what is our definition of success? So if we know and have a clear idea as an organization of where we want to go, all we're doing potentially is taking a slightly different path or a very different path, but we still have all those decisions that we are making now help set us up for success, and those success parameters first and foremost are the same, or we need to figure out what they are before we keep doing things.
Yeah. So it sounds like from what you're saying, it's not about, there's no silver bullet or magic answer or solution or technology that you can buy. It's really being adaptable that really helps your organization work out, is it going to be successful or not?
Yeah, so Dave and I both do a lot of work to do with digital transformation and talking about the future of work in consulting and education environments and research environments. And one of the analogies I like to use is that technology is a quick release drug, and most transformation that is useful is a slow release drug. So what the challenge is, though, is that the entire world has potentially done a quick release drug. And so we don't know what the side effects of that are. So at least if we do little bit by little bit, we can experiment, we know what success is, we can tweak, we can reiterate, we can do that. But a lot of the digital transformation and the tech, which is great and plays a huge role in helping us do things, can only support us doing things when we have a clear understanding of what it is that we want to do, and that we know that that is the right thing to do for our strategy execution and will help lead us into that process of success. So it'll be interesting. We don't know the side effects of all of us doing this at home. It is an experiment. And again, I think it's important that when we think about how to set ourselves up for success, this was not part of the strategy for a lot of organizations. This was not a digital transformation or the test of those business continuity plans that we had, and yay, we had them and they worked. I think a lot of organizations were like, so we kind of got that a little bit wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, Dave, what's your thoughts just around adapting to this new way?
Yeah, I think a critical thing is, as we've said, we're in a survival frame. You know, there will be a short period of review, and then you've got to reset. And I think the critical thing I think is, what have we learned? What's worked well? What hasn't worked well? Lots of companies have said, "Oh, Dave, you do agile training. Will you come and do agile training?" And I'm like, "Whoa, hang on a minute. That you've just happened to have responded in a very quick way to a situation. That doesn't mean that your culture is conducive to an agile way of operating." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So I think we also need to be careful about some of these buzzwords that are flying around agility, design thinking, and all of that sort of stuff. And then suddenly thinking, right, we need to keep doing that after, we get into this new normal. I think we need to think carefully about what's the business model and the operational model once the new normal, the reset has occurred. What does that mean for your talent? What does that mean for how what I call reboard people back into the organization? Because I think we're going to have to think about reboarding people, which is not onboarding, but reboarding. Because I think a lot of organizations are going to have new processes, new ways of doing things, and we can't just assume that everybody's going to just get it automatically. So I think organizations are going to have to think about, how do we reboard people back into this new normal organization, and how do we take them with us? How do they help us to maximize the technology? And more importantly, how can we make that experience for them at work even more positive as a result of what has happened? And that may mean that they work from home more. It may mean they've got a mixed, working from home and working in the office, or maybe they just continue working in the office. But I just don't think we're going to just go back to how it was. And I think those that do that will find themselves in some trouble, because employees may well be now thinking things have changed quickly. Let's see what the change will now be when we get back.
But the other thing, Dave, is it's not just our employees that have changed. Our customers have changed. Our suppliers have changed. Our supply chains have changed. Like, this is why it's kind of fascinating to see how we do this as a team, as society, because a lot of those variables, we can't just say it's about the new normal for our workplace.
No.
It is going to change the way in which we interact as human beings. And it's not just us. It's every single part of the equation is doing its own reset.
Yes.
So and first mover advantage probably doesn't necessarily apply too much when we're talking about strategy. So I think that's the other thing, is that when we're talking about resetting our workplace and leadership, is that we've got to also recognize that our customers are resetting, our suppliers are resetting, our families are resetting, our notion of schooling and where schooling needs to occur is resetting. All of which is where people are still trying to keep the lights on and be commercially viable. But it is that survive. Are we trying to survive, or are we trying to thrive? And as human beings, for a lot of us, we are on a heightened sense of awareness. So we can't forget the neuroscience of this as well, in terms of, we can't just say, oh, we're going to sit down at the table and figure this out and scenario plan and work out a plan together. It's like, well, okay, but like, I've still got like relatives that are sick, or that I can't see, or that, like, so as human beings and societies, we are in this heightened state of awareness. And I'm not sure how long it will take all of us to kind of come down to be able to have that reflective decision making that we kind of take for granted as part of how we do things in workplaces.
And I think, just building on that, Shana, that the underlying principle is there will not be a one size fits all. Every organization, because of what you've just said, will have a different set of parameters, a different set of boundaries, a different set of challenges. And so there won't just be, here's this magic technology that will solve this. This is the magic strategy that will solve that. It's unfortunately not going to be that easy.
And I think I totally agree. And I think as we move to what I mean, people are calling a low touch economy or a low touch society, whether that's, short term or longer term, it's going to be about, it'll be picking certain tools, picking certain strategies. I think, Charna, you made the comment earlier about making decisions, and even if they're wrong, just making decisions and moving forward and kind of continually evaluating. And they're the organizations, and I think the countries, the people who are going to react best to that. If we push forward, we react, we take advantage of the tools that are there, we take advantage of the relationships we have, and see how this thing evolves, because it's still in many ways very early days.
And I want to pick up on that, Jerry, and Safi, to your point before of setting us up for success. One of the things is, if we make decisions and they were successful, sometimes we don't see anything.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing, right? Is that when we talk about the tech or seeing things or making decisions, I always love saying, sometimes when you make a good decision, you don't see anything. And that is the point. The point is that something didn't come to fruition that could have. And as an Aussie, I always find it fascinating when we talk, we do a lot of spot fires and backburning. And yes, we still have massive issues with fires, and everyone is aware of our situation over the last summer. But I'm kind of like, the whole point of effective backburning is we see less of those. We see less of those things that we need to put out. And we made a decision to do something proactively to decrease the risk of that. And I think when we're talking about, to bring it kind of full circle with our leadership, is that you can tell the leaders that made decisions, less things happened. So the notion of success was that there were less people in hospital, less people dying, less issues with face masks, less issues with such and such. So I think that's also a really useful part of our parameters of success in coming out of it. And Dave, what have we learned is that let's expand our vision of what success means. Success is sometimes what we don't see, and what we don't experience can be just as rewarding of that of what we do.
Yeah, I think, and to organizations that have done well, I think that's a good point, is we often crave excitement and interesting things to happen. But for those organizations I've worked with that who've done really well, well, not well, but who've reacted well in this situation, they've done so with a minimum of excitement. They were prepared enough that they could get on and do that. And that maybe validated those decisions that were made a long time ago.
Right. And that question for you, I mean, you touched before when you were talking just about employees thinking differently about, when they start thinking about going back. And you also spoke about, you're seeing increased demand for employee surveys and things like that. Do you think organizations are actually listening? Are they taking action based on the feedback that they're getting from employees? Or it's too early?
I think there's reports coming out that are indicating that some organizations are, not surprisingly, doing pretty well. Managers and leaders are listening to them and are communicating. They're reinforcing issues and points. They're trying to talk about the return to work from those who are working from home. How can that be done in a safe and positive way? How will that impact on your childcare scenario? Because things aren't quite as simple as you're here or you're there anymore. So I think those organizations, a bit what Shana said earlier, I think, is that if organizations have done it well in the past, they've probably done it quite well in this particular period. I think the underlying challenge is undoubtedly communication. That is the most important thing, and it's about just making sure that people feel that they are involved in something, they feel part of something, and that yes, it may be a challenging time when we go back, but actually collectively we can do it. So it's back to when I talked about the leadership. There's a bit of you need to be an inspiring and energizing. That's not easy over Zoom or Teams. That's difficult to do. But, these are some of the behavioral changes that leaders and managers have got to do. I think the intent of organizations to listen is there. I think it's, and Shana touched on it, it's about words and action equals change. That's what I always keep in my mind. We've been very good at words. It's the action. And I think when all you've got is a laptop to look at or a computer screen in your home, in your bedroom, you need something that's going to reassure you and make you feel that actually this will be okay. It may be difficult, it may be challenging. And I think it's no more than engaging and connecting with your workforce in a way that's appropriate for those individuals. So again, I don't think it's anything super special, but I think it's what good and great leaders and managers already do. I think we just need to make sure that the lessons learned from this are taken forward after the event, so that we start to get other managers and leaders understanding why this interest in people, this empathetic view, this high involvement, this is why it's important. Because those organizations where, you know, the trauma and the disruption that this has created has possibly not been as traumatic as other people have thought. And that's probably because the employees have felt connected, involved, and empowered. And I think those are the critical things that organizations have got to do if they're going to really listen to their workforce.
No,
And
that's right.
Safi, if I could indulge by sharing with the people that are listening with us tonight, a practical takeaway that might be useful out of our conversations as well, is one of the exercises I do with my MBA students when we're talking about talent. So I teach responsible talent management strategies, is that I ask them who their professional crush is. So you were talking before about leaders, and Dave kind of illuminated it.
Yeah.
But one of our conversations to do with talent at the end of our class is about how do you become the talent? How do you become that leader? And so I ask them who their professional crush is, and then I ask them why. And then I say, if you don't have a professional crush, go get one. And that's even pre-COVID-19, because actually those leaders that you aspire to be or that you want to follow don't have to be in your organization. And I think that's an important point too. We can learn from that peripheral vision. And then the question that I give them is, what are you going to do to become somebody else's professional crush? Yeah. So the students that I teach as an executive educator, I have the privilege of teaching those that are our current and future leaders of these organizations that we talk about in a removed sense. And I'm like, how do you become that leader? How do you do something where somebody below you or outside of your organization, or just that works with you and interacts with you, goes, you're my professional crush and I want to work for you. And this is a great opportunity because, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, people remember how you treat them. People will remember how you feel. And as an executive educator, it's always like, it's not what I have to say, but it's what my students take away, is that it's kind of like, okay, how do I give you something or a tool set or some form of conversational dialogue where you feel like I've got this? And then what can I do that's in terms of actions that you now have followership? So when we're talking about leadership, and we don't do it still, which I think is part of my remit, is to go, when we tell people to be good leaders, we don't tell people how to be good followers. And so in some organizations at the moment, what we need from our workforce is just to be good followers. Just put your head down. We need to do these things to get this stuff done. In terms of potentially, Jerry, our business continuity plans, when we didn't think about the people, where we're like, this is part of our business continuity. We just need to have our workforce team just for this moment in time. We just need you to put your head down and do this. And we will pick up all the nice to haves on the other part. But yeah, that's how do you become someone's professional crush? So
that's a good one. I've got to start thinking.
Well, I totally crush out on Jacinda Ardern, but I did before COVID-19. So it's interesting watching that idea of leadership and making decisions and being visible. If I talk about those qualities, part of my job is to also make sure that I'm walking the talk, not just telling my students or execs that I talk to go do this, to go, actually, here's my one. Like, if you want to talk about leadership, like I wrote about it, but I'm like, decisions, visible decisions, and the results of that are something else, but at least having leadership making decisions.
I mean, taking Shana's crush concept to a different level. I mean, in an organization locally, you if you're a leader or a manager listening to this today, you might want to say, are you a talent magnet? Does somebody want to desperately come and work for you? And if you can't answer that question and say, oh, I don't see why people would want to come and work for me, you've got some work to do. So I think leaders and managers of the future need to be talent magnets, something that attracts people who says, I want to come and work with you, for you, because I think it's A, going to be a great experience, and B, I'm going to learn a whole host of stuff. And it could be challenging, it could be hard, but hey, you know, it's going to be worthwhile. So I think that's the crush aspect of what Shana's talked about, I guess, in a slightly more business language there context.
The talent magnet, professional crush. Got it.
There you go. There we go. Put the two together and we'll come up with a new idea altogether.
There's your LinkedIn taglines.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this really brings me to I guess the final question in this podcast, and it's really about sort of summing up, I guess, a lot of what we've talked about today around, and I'll ask each one of you guys, starting with you, Jerry. I mean, what do you see are the key business learnings that we can all take from this I guess unprecedented event that we're in?
I think organizations who look at their BCP strategy and redefine it to focus on people, I think that's going to be the key learning. I think the strategy needs to be flexible. It needs to be forward-looking while taking into account the things that have happened before. But it really needs to be focused on the outcomes for their people, and probably for the outcomes for society in general, but really for the people within their organization. What does business continuity mean for them? Maybe it means an office that they go to if their office isn't working. Maybe it means more flexible working or working from home. It definitely means some technology toolkits, some ways of collaborating and working together. It means trust, but I think it comes down to the end, having business continuity that's focused on the people rather than just exclusively on the business itself.
No, absolutely. Shana?
So I want to encourage everyone to harness their inner Snow White and start looking in the mirror, because I think COVID-19 is a fantastic, or the current climate is a fantastic opportunity for us to all pause, for us as society and leaders, managers, workers, fellow humans, and then the mass of that of organizations to reflect. Because some of us think it's full of opportunity, and some of us think that it's a really unwelcome sort of reset of how we do businesses. But the other thing in terms of building on their professional crush is I'm really interested in the leaders per se, and then how we mobilize our workforces to do that. So I'd ask everyone, as they're looking in the mirror, to think about what their actions are and whether those actions should warrant criticisms or whether it warrants applause. Because I think we need to pause and take that time to reflect as leaders, as we are doing this in terms of crisis, to say, how am I acting? Is this a way in which my workforce will critique me, or my team will critique me, or that they will think that it's an element of applause? So everyone, have a look in the mirror. And when you're looking in those mirrors to do with your workplace strategies and how you mobilize your workforce and make decisions, let's see if the mirror is just illuminating those flaws that you didn't see before or chose not to see, because the world is on show, and so is your leadership. So let's have a look at what we are reflecting backwards and what we can do to change that.
No, that's good advice, Shana. Finally, Dave.
I'll take a slightly different slant to Jerry and Shana. I agree with everything they've said. I'm going to take possibly a bit more of an organizational effectiveness view at this. I'll make no bones about it. I've just published a book called Introduction to People Analytics, and in it there is a model called the 3Ds. Okay, and I think the 3Ds for me probably give a pretty good overview about what organizations need to think about as they look forward. So first D is data. What does the evidence say that you have collected about your business, about your people, about everything? What is the evidence saying? What's the data saying about what's worked, what hasn't worked, what needs to change? Second D is design. How can we future-proof our organization and our talent practices for tomorrow? Because just because it worked yesterday doesn't mean it's going to work for tomorrow, because it could be that people are in a different type of configuration of jobs, roles, whatever. And the final D is digital, which has been a theme of all of our conversation today. So how can we make sure that we build on the acceptance that technology has suddenly had over the last few months, where it's suddenly been leveraged to a level where everybody's now using anything that's quite sexy and talking online? But what can we do to actually build on that? And remember, when we're thinking about the 3Ds, always ask ourselves the question, what matters now to the workforce? And I think that would be my sort of thought.
Yeah. No, thank you, Dave. And I think the thing I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had over the last hour, and I think for me, it's really bringing it back to Jerry, the point that you made, that everything we've talked about is really putting people at the forefront. Yes, business is important. Yes, making money. Yes, technology. All those things are important, but ultimately, the world that we live in and the world we share with this world environment around us is all about people. And I think if all we do is show a bit more connection and engagement with people, walk the right walk and do the right thing, whether it was during this crisis or the next or whenever, then it sounds like, you know, we're on the right path to success, both as an individual and as organizations. So I really want to thank you for your time. Thank you everyone